Belinda Murrell is author of 36 books, and her latest is the middle grade novel, The Silver Sea. She has worked as a travel writer, a journalist, a public relations consultant, but has now been a full-time author for many years. She's known for her fantasy adventure series, the Sun Sword trilogy, her time slip adventures for slightly older readers, and for younger readers, her beautiful Lulu Bell and Pippa's Island series. Let's have a chat with Belinda Murrell. Thank you so much for joining us today, Belinda.
Oh, thank you so much, Valerie, for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Oh, your latest book is The Silver Sea, but it's actually the billionth book that you've written. So I'm so interested to talk about your whole author career and how you've navigated it and so on. But first, let's tell listeners who haven't got their hands on a copy yet of The Silver Sea what it's about.
So The Silver Sea is the second book in my Tuscan series. So it's set in this magical world. So it's about a girl called Sophie, an Australian girl who goes to England to stay with her nana. And while she's there, she accidentally stumbles through this magical portal into another land, the land of Tuscia. And Tuscia is a land of magic, mystery, wonder, flying horses and talking cats and mischievous creatures, but also danger and evil perils. So Sophie has to find all her courage to set off on this dangerous quest in the land of Tuscia. And the Silver Sea, she goes back and sets off on another dangerous quest to save her grandmother.
How fantastic. And what age group would you say this is for?
Well, it's definitely middle grade. So it's for sort of year 5, year 6, like sort of 10 to 12-year-olds mainly. But of course, really good readers can read it younger, and older readers read it right up into high school, but that's the core age.
I love the idea that this magical world of Tuscia is actually, well, it's a magical world, but it draws a lot of inspiration from the Renaissance in Italy, which is one of my absolute favorite periods and places in history. Why did you pick that as a source of inspiration?
Oh, it started about 5 years ago. I was on holiday with my family in Italy, and we had 5 weeks in Italy over the Christmas holidays. And I was looking for inspiration for a new book. And we were in Rome, and we're walking the cobbled streets of Trastevere. And we look up, and I see this little street sign that says Vicolo de Mazzamarelli. And I said to my kids, oh, look, that little alleyway is named after us, the Morell family, or the Morelli family. And my kids laughed and said, I don't think so, Mum. But being an author or a writer, I'm just endlessly curious. So I had to know, what is a Mazzamarelli, and why was this little alleyway called Vicolo de Mazzamarelli? So I Googled it and discovered that Mazzamarelli are these little Italian goblins, these little magical folk. And apparently there was a palazzo on this spot, and it was haunted by a tribe of really naughty, mischievous Mazzamarelli that would come out and they'd eat all the cake and drink all the milk and make noise at night and wake everyone up and play tricks on people. And so I just thought, oh my goodness, I have never heard of Mazzamarelli, and I have to write a book with these little mischievous creatures in it. And that brought me into the whole folklore of Italy and the Italian Renaissance history, which I adore, like you. And so that's what started it off. It was just this little chance encounter with Vicolo de Mazzamarelli and discovering that these little creatures are just adorable, mischievous tricksters. And so I drew a lot on the history of Italian Renaissance, and some of the characters are inspired by real historical people. So, and Italian fairy tales are just so awesome. So that's what started it off.
Did you know it was going to be a series at that point?
No. I actually just thought The Golden Tower would be a one-off standalone book, and that's how I pitched it to my publisher. And she fell in love with the idea as well, and especially having the talking cats and the flying horses. And then after I had written it and the first book came out, I'd spent that whole time living in that world. And I thought, oh, I wonder if Sophie could go back and what would her next adventure be? And I started playing around with these ideas. And when The Golden Tower came out, it did really well. And my publisher rang me up and said, Belinda, can you get me a pitch for a second book? And she gave me no time to do it. So luckily I'd been daydreaming. And then she said, right, we want a second book and we want it to come out as quickly as possible. So luckily it was lockdown. So I spent the whole of lockdown last year immersed in the land of Tuscany again, which was so wonderful.
Wow. Now, when you are creating a fantastical world, you need to make sure that it is believable, but it also needs to be consistent.
Yes.
So in terms of your world building, to make sure that you were navigating your characters through the right kinds of geographic and environmental situations, Do you have any kind of dossier or some kind of Bible or something that helps you with that world building?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the first thing that I decided I had to do was to go back to Italy, of course. So back 2 years later with my family, and we stayed in a golden tower in Lucca, a medieval tower that was 1,000 years old, and we walked the valleys, and we walked the landscape, and then we stayed in a beautiful castello outside Florence that had another golden tower, so that we had that sense of really living in the places. And I write really detailed travel journals when I'm traveling, so that I can draw back on the smells, the sounds, the tastes, the food, the architecture. And then I have vision boards that I make, which are just I get things off the internet, which are beautiful photographs of Tuscan landscape or beautiful architecture, the clothing, the Renaissance clothing, the food, and I just build files. I have folders where I photocopy stuff and whack it in there. I have these beautiful PowerPoint and Pinterest. I use a lot of Pinterest as well. So I had literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos on Pinterest that I could go in there and just remind me of what things looked like. And yes, a lot of work went into the research, months and months and months for each of the books.
Now, with I'd love to give listeners some context, because now, what number book is this? Really, it's like the billionth, right?
It's not quite billionth. No, it's book number 36. So I'm just working on book number 37 now. So yes, my 36 book, 35 of them for children and one adult nonfiction. So yes, which is
so when you come from a family of writers.
Yes, I do.
So it's always been part of your growing up. Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer, though, when you were little?
No. When I was young, I loved I loved writing. I always wrote, and so did my sister and my brother. My sister's Kate Forsyth, and my brother Nick Humphrey is also a published author. And we did it for fun. We just loved it. We used to write poems and plays and stories and novels. But I actually always wanted to be a vet like my father and look after animals. I'm a bit animal obsessed. And it wasn't until I was in year 12 and my principal said to me, Belinda, let's have a look at your marks. Yes, you're topping English. Yes, you're topping extension history, and your chemistry. Oh, and your physics. Oh, and you failed maths. And so she suggested to me that perhaps I might not enjoy my life as a vet, having to do all that chemistry and physics and maths. And so I switched and went to university and studied creative writing, literature, and journalism. And so I've been working as a writer since I left uni at the age of 20. So, so I think that we just had a book mad family. So I think it was inevitable that I would write.
And then you published your first series, or your first book in your first series,
yes,
the Sun Sword series.
Yes.
And that is also middle grade, right?
Yes, exactly.
And at that point, when did it occur to you, I want to do this full time? Because presumably you had some other day job.
Yeah, so I was working as a freelance journalist, and I'm a travel writer. So I used to write lots of travel articles and do all sorts of freelance writing. When my kids were little, I had my own sort of freelance business. And I wrote my first book for my 3 kids because they were mad keen readers like I was as a child. And then it took me 2 years to write my first book. And then I sent it off to Random House. And I had a call from Zoe Walton a few weeks later saying, we love it. This looks like a trilogy. When can you get me the next book? And I hadn't started the next book. So I quickly typed up about 20 words and said, oh, yes, I've started book 2. Yes, of course I can get it to you soon. And so, which was a big fib. But anyway, I just gave up my other job and focused on working full time. And so I never thought that I would be a full-time children's author, but it just kind of happened that the first books did really well. And then Zoe said to me, oh, what's the next book going to be? And so it rolled on from there. So I feel like I've been incredibly lucky in my career in that I have been a full-time children's author working with the same amazing publishing team for 16 years.
Wow.
Yes.
And 37 books later.
Yes, exactly. So, and it's just been along the way, I've segued into doing slightly different things. So I've written junior fiction, I've written some picture books, some early chapter books and things like that, just to keep it exciting, interesting, and new challenges.
So,
And
with the exception of the non-fiction book
yes,
that you wrote with your sister,
yes,
Searching for Charlotte, which is
yes,
actually about your grandmother, who
yes,
has a very literary history, the rest have been, as you say, children's, young adult,
yes,
that kind of age group.
yes, absolutely.
Why children? Why that age group?
I think as a mother, I started off writing for my three children, and I think started off writing what they love to read, and also being aware of them as readers, seeing what was missing in the market. And I absolutely love writing for children because children are passionate about the books that they love. They don't give you any leeway. If they don't like it, they'll throw it away within a page or two. But if they love you, they will write to you and they will tell you how much they love your books. They will write to you when you're 19 and tell you that your books have changed their life and have created the young adult that they've become. And I just love that idea that you're writing books that can change the world, because I know that's a really big statement, but I really believe that writing books for kids can shape the next generation and encourage them to think about the world and their place in it, which I think is just a huge honor and just something that I don't take lightly. It's just amazing.
It's so true, though, isn't it? You are absolutely shaped by the things that have had an impact on you when you were a child, particularly, of course, the things that you read. So, do you? Some authors do a lot of school visits, school talks,
Yes,
that sort of thing. Is that something that you do a lot of?
absolutely. I have just come off 8 weeks of the new book being launched and also book week, and the first book week we've had in 3 years. So I have done 8 solid weeks of touring. I've been speaking probably 6 days a week for 8 weeks. I've been to Outback Queensland. I've been to Melbourne. I've been to regional New South Wales. I think I've done 55 1-hour author talks in the last few weeks, as well as probably about 20 bookstore events, as well as library events, literary lunches with hundreds of kids. So I'm exhausted, but it has been so amazing.
Now, once somebody becomes a children's author, they realize that that is part of the gig, and most of them absolutely embrace it. A lot of people, because I talk to a lot of aspiring children's authors who haven't quite got published yet, they're not, it's like they're not even aware that this is something that children's authors do on a regular basis. Did you know that you would be doing this when you first started children's writing?
No, and if I had known, I might have been more terrified. But no, I didn't. And I think possibly I was lucky because it started gradually. And I remember when I had my first meeting with my very first publicist, and she said, okay, well, this is part of the job. And I went, oh, really? Oh, gosh. And recently at the Kids and YA Festival, a publisher was saying to me that what they're looking for is what they call the golden trifecta. And it's an author who can write amazing books that obviously sell well, but they can also present really well and speak really well on podcasts, at school visits, at media interviews. And thirdly, that are absolute geniuses at social media. I'm thinking, my gosh, like this, it's such a huge ask, but that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, that's so true these days. Now let's talk about your beautiful Lulu Bell series, which is younger than,
Yes, it is. It's junior. Yes.
yeah. Well, what age group would you say that is?
Well, it's sort of about 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 year olds. And that's my top selling series. It was, it's been hugely, hugely popular and sold really well, which is, was such a surprise and such a joy. And I get all these gorgeous book week photographs of kids dressed up as Lulu Bell, and they send me beautiful illustrations based on Serena's drawings. And so, yes, so Lulu Bell is a series of 13 books, and it's about a family that's growing up living in a vet hospital, just like I was as a child. So it's about friends and family and animal adventures. And Lulu Bell's the oldest one in the family, just like I was. And she's got a sweet and adorable little sister who looks very much like my sister Kate, and a very naughty, naughty, naughty little brother called Gus, who's very much like my brother was as a child. So it's very much inspired by my childhood.
So obviously inspired by your childhood, but what made you wanted to write this series?
It was what made me want to write it? It was I'd been writing for my own children a lot, and then I think it was, my sister Kate had a younger daughter, Ella, and I can remember Ella saying, well, what can I read? And so I think I must have started writing it for my niece Ella when she was quite young. And also, it was this idea I told my children all these stories about the funny things that happened in the vet hospital when I was growing up. And they'd always be asking me to tell these stories. And then Ella started asking for these stories. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this would be a great idea for a story. And so I pitched the idea of 4 junior picture books to my publisher, and she's going, oh, okay, let's give it a go. And then I think we were all surprised at how well they did. So it's 4 books, and then it was 6 books, and it was 8 books, and then 10 books. And so it ended up being 13 books in the series. And yeah, it's absolutely a gorgeous, lovely, fun
Oh,
story.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's
so beautiful. But then something quite different. You write this time slip series.
Yes.
And for an older age group, what age group is that? And maybe you can describe what the time slip series involved.
Absolutely. Well, they're for older kids. So they're sort of like from 12 to 14-year-olds or slightly younger for very good readers. And I wrote these for my daughter, Emily. And when she was that age, I realized that she was reading all these books with her brothers, and they all had male protagonists. So she was reading Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, Cherub series, all of those books all had a boy as the main character. But she was also reading some very, very old classic books that had girls as main characters, like Anne of Green Gables and Little Women and all of those books. And I thought, hang on, there's something wrong about this. Like, why isn't my daughter finding books, and this was a few years ago, where there are strong girl protagonists that she can aspire to be like? So that was the first idea I had, was writing books that I thought my daughter would love. So I wanted to combine that classic feeling of some of the older books together with a modern protagonist. So time slip, of course. And so I wrote The Locket of Dreams, which was also inspired by a story my grandmother told me when I was a little girl about how her grandmother came out to Australia from Scotland. And it was a very romantic tale. So I sort of wound together this idea of time slip and a modern character, finding an old piece of jewelry that was a link to the character that lived in the past. And my gosh, when that book came out, I suddenly got this flood of letters from all these readers saying, oh, Belinda, please, please, please write more books like this. I love it. And so I think of all the books I've written, the time slip ones are the ones I get the most passionate love letters from kids, from readers, mostly girls, of course. And it was this idea of just creating, which of course lots of other people have done now, but back then when I first started writing them, there weren't many books that had girls as the strong, brave, bold, fearless, feisty main character.
So when you're writing a time slip, you have by definition, you have dual narratives.
Yes.
So in terms of planning that, is that like quite difficult?
Yeah, it is. And there's masses of research because they're all set in different historical periods, whether it's 1850s Scotland or the Ivory Rose is set in 1895 in Annandale. It's just before Federation, or the Forgotten Pearl is set up in Darwin during the Second World War. So months and months of research, and then planning and plotting the stories out, the narrative arcs, the modern day, and then the historical section, and then weaving them together. And so, yes, that's really quite tricky, and working out a segue, something that links between the past and the present. And yeah, so, but I loved the challenge of writing those sorts of books. It was just, I adore those books. They're just my favorite.
Now, obviously, when you've written 37 books, we can't talk about them all because there simply isn't enough time. So let's fast forward to today.
Yes.
You've also got the Pippa's Island series.
Yes.
You've got the Aussie Kids series.
Yes.
I've already mentioned you wrote Searching for Charlotte with your sister. What does your year look like in terms
Crazy.
of
like crazy?
Do you generally have some kind of
yes.
Get rid of COVID, and
yes.
do you generally have some kind of plan or schedule that you typically adhere to get everything done?
Absolutely. So I have a sort of, a daily schedule and a weekly schedule, but my year, I tend to have blocks of time. So book week term, which is this term now, the sort of August, so July, August, September, is always filled with lots and lots of school visits and literary events and festivals and things. So normally I don't try to write in that time. And then if I have a new book coming out, I might go on tour as well, and that might be 4 weeks or 6 weeks of marketing. And then I block out masses of time where I just go, okay, well, to write that book, I need to set myself goals. So I normally say, okay, I'll try and set myself a goal of 1,000 words a day, 5,000 words a week, 20,000 words a month, and try to, that's 3 months to write a 65,000 word book, which obviously takes longer. And then there's the editing and the research on either end. So I plan out the year that way and give myself deadlines. So I have to finish the research on a certain day. Otherwise, the book will never get written. And it's so much fun researching that I could spend months down those rabbit holes. So then I really plan it out very, very thoroughly and have these deadlines. And I pitch to my publisher based on a synopsis and maybe some early chapters. So I have to, she gives me a deadline, and then I just work my butt off to get it done and get it to her on time.
So you sound pretty organized. With your goal of 1,000 words a day, what does your writing day look like? Like, how many hours do you typically write for or aim to write for? And do you have any writing rituals, or, some people have to go for a walk in the morning or go to get their coffee, that sort of thing? What's your day look like?
Well, when my kids were younger, I used to write between 9 and 3. So I'd, get them ready, drop them at school, race home, grab a coffee, and write my little heart out till I had to remember to set the alarm to go and pick them up from school. And then I might sneak some more in the evening. But now that they're older, I don't have to do that so much. So I tend to just get up. I take my dog for a walk along the beach, clear my head, think about what I'd like to do that day, have a plan, come back, make a coffee, sit down and work. And then normally my husband comes kind of like trying to entice me out at nighttime going, are we having dinner tonight? Do we have any clean undies? It's those sorts of things. So I can get sort of very completely hyper-focused, and then it's very hard for me to remember about the real world. So so I do I'm not a fast writer. It's just that I tend to spend a lot of time at my desk, and if as a deadline's coming up, I probably would work 6 or 7 days a week, and I'd probably write for 12 hours a day to get that deadline met, and then have to try and give myself time off afterwards to
And when you say you write a synopsis, and that's what your publisher basically approves and says go ahead or not.
Yes.
So does that mean you do know what's going to happen in your books?
Yes. Right. Absolutely. So the first synopsis, well, I normally pitch to her, it might pitch to her 2 or 3 ideas. And so they're not completely very detailed at that point, but they have a beginning, a middle, and end. They have a set of characters. They have a setting that I'm very clear on, and I know what's going to happen, what the key problems are, and how it's going to end. And then when we go through those ideas, there'll probably be one that stands out, and she'll say, yes, let's go with that one. And then I take it away and I develop that further. So I might do chapter plans and quite detailed. I know for the Golden Tower, my synopsis that I pitched her was like 6,000 or 7,000 words. So it's like 10% of a book. It was very detailed. And then we give short blurbs for her to take to the acquisitions meeting. So it's sort of actually probably about 3 sets of very brief synopsis, a 1 or 2 page synopsis, and then a really, really, really detailed synopsis. So she knows how it's all coming together.
You actually sound really organised that I'm surprised that aren't clean undies in the house.
Well, I'm actually joking because normally my kids do have clean undies, but it's just kind of that into the crack of the days.
All right. So with the Silver Sea then,
yes.
Now that this is out into the world, you say that you are writing book number 37. Is this the next one?
No, I'm not going to write the next one at the moment. I'd actually already pitched an idea to my publisher, which was another junior fiction series, so about the same age range as Lulubelle. And it was an idea that I had been playing around with. And so we decided that would be the next project. And also I've had 3 or 4 really intense years with Searching for Charlotte. It was such a huge project that took 2 years to research and write. And then The Golden Town, The Silver Sea are quite large books, like they're about between 65 and 70,000 words, and took, a lot of research to write. So I thought it might be nice to just change and have a change of pace and write something that was younger and fun, really fun and magical and shorter. So that's my next project.
Oh, how exciting. That's fantastic. Well, congratulations on the Silver Sea. People are going to absolutely love it. What a fantastic world. What great characters, with Sophie and her family and her friends and all of that. Let's end with what are I usually ask what your top three writing tips are, but because you really focus on children and teenagers,
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, what are your top three tips on really connecting with a children's audience and making sure you are telling stories that really resonate with them?
Oh, I think that's really important. I'd say the most important ingredients for me for a middle grade book, for example, would be first of all this idea of friendship. Kids are just love great friendships. So having characters that your readers are really going to fall in love with, and perhaps aspirational characters as well, slightly older, smarter, braver, bolder than your reader, so that they've got something to look up to and aim to be like. So characters you fall in love with. I'd say the second thing was also like having an antagonist, like a villain that you love to hate, and making sure that they're really believable and authentic, that you can understand their motivations too, that they're quite complex villains. I think a really, really important tip for writing middle grade is pacing and adventure. So a lot of the manuscripts I read from aspiring writers, they're just a bit slow, and they've got perhaps beautiful lyrical language, or they've got this lovely, amazing backstory, or they've got all this dialogue. But with kids, you need to keep the pace moving quite quickly. You need to jump into the action and just keep that pace going. So I think pacing and adventure is really, really important. And I'd also imagine adding in a bit of humor to make kids laugh, because I think lots of kids love books that make them laugh and that are really entertaining and exciting. And also that idea of magic, enchantment, creating a world that you just want to escape into. So they're some of my top tips for writing children's books. Is those ingredients I think are absolutely crucial.
Absolutely fantastic. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Belinda.
Oh, Valerie, thank you so much. It's been a delight to chat with you, and it's just been amazing. So thank you very much for having me.